Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to talk about the movies. Welcome to episode 4 of The Movie Proposal. I'm here with my friend Josh Lindsey.
Hey, everybody.
I'm Skye Jethani. Thanks for joining us. This is another kind of pre-podcast pilot episode of The Movie Proposal. We've done a couple of these. We appreciate your feedback, especially those of you who have subscribed to Phil Vischer's Patreon page and are helping to support this, as well as the Phil Vischer podcast and our other random projects. So this week we are talking about a Christian film, which we'll get to in a little bit, because we've been alternating between kind of new release popular movies and then some lesser known Christian movies. But the way we organize this podcast is the way you think about a wedding, which is something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. So Josh, we're going to begin, as we always do, with something old. Do you have a movie or media, something or other that you saw this week from days gone by that you want to remind everybody of?
Yes. Well, what inspired me to think of this film was, so today we're reviewing a film that stars Jesus. And so I was trying to think of other films that were inspiring that I really enjoyed that had an interpretation of Jesus. And what I picked was Life is Beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
The foreign film.
The one about the Holocaust.
Yes, back in 1997. And I don't believe the filmmakers were making a film about Jesus, but I interpreted it that way.
Okay.
This is one of my all-time, it's in the top 10 of my favorite films. And the film is broken into two parts. If you haven't seen it, the first part is where the lead actor is pursuing his wife. And so it's a sweet, beautiful love story. Mm-hmm. And then the second half is dealing with the Holocaust, where the family's put into a concentration camp. And it's about the father trying to save the son's life. Mm-hmm. And there's just a huge analogy of what Jesus did for us compared to what the father did for the son to save his life. Mm-hmm. And then when you take that analogy and you even look back further into the beginning of the film, where that love story, I think the analogy carries further, where the main character is pursuing his bride as Jesus pursues us in this beautiful love story. Okay. And so, one of my all-time favorite films. I know they weren't trying to tell us about Jesus, or I don't think they were, but that's what I saw in that movie.
Well, now I feel like a total jerk. Because here you are bringing these deep spiritual themes into one of the most profound movies of our lifetime. And my something old is Mission Impossible.
Still a great film.
Well, okay, so here's my dilemma. In the last week, I've watched the two last Mission Impossible movies, which were Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation.
Yes.
Right? Those are the last two.
Yep.
I don't know when it was, a year or so ago, I saw that documentary about Scientology and Tom Cruise's whole role in it.
Which made me question about seeing any more of his films.
Exactly. So I did not go to the theater to see the new Mission Impossible movies because I felt some kind of moral compulsion not to support Tom Cruise and his I want to say a bad word here, but a Batman crazy religious cult, right? And so I did not go to the theater to see it, but they were available streaming on a service that we get, like a Hulu kind of service. Okay. So I watched them this week, and darn it, I totally love these movies. I feel like Brokeback Mountain. I just can't quit you, Tom Cruise. And I've mentioned on a previous podcast how I've been so disappointed with recent James Bond movies. I'm a huge Bond fan from the time I was a kid, but the Daniel Craig Bond movies are so dreary and they're not fun, and he's not having fun doing it. And then you watch the Mission Impossible movies and you're like, this is what Bond is supposed to be. I mean, it doesn't have all the tropes of a James Bond movie, but it's fun. It's just good entertainment. And
you liked Rogue Nation?
I did. I mean, I'm not expecting huge things. I'm not looking for, life is beautiful, deep insights into the meaning of life and God. It's just fun popcorn movie, and huge holes, big plot problems. I pointed those, but still, it was fun. It was entertaining.
It was entertaining. Ghost Protocol is my favorite of all of them by far.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Although the way they depict Mumbai is totally not real.
They can depict it any way they want. I've never been there.
I know. But anyway, so those aren't super old movies, but they're old enough.
And I do want to say a shout out to Pam, who commented on the Patreon website. Yeah. She was asking for older films, like, not just
really old movies.
like now you can see things on Netflix where that's like, really old, like Casablanca kind of stuff. And so I thought that was fantastic. I went back as far as 1997. That's about as far as I could go, but I'm going to keep that in mind as we go forward.
That's not the problem I have is, to be honest with everybody, is my week can be kind of full and busy. We both have 3 kids.
Yes.
And they're all school age, and it's just life's not only beautiful, it's also very busy. So sometimes the ability to sit down. The reason I mentioned the Mission Impossible movies is because I watched them with my 11-year-old.
Okay.
And we enjoyed that time together. But some of the really old stuff, it's hard. Although I did get him to sit down and watch The Great Escape.
Oh, wow.
Maybe a year ago, the old Steve McQueen.
Yeah,
What a great movie. But it's hard as a family to get time to see those old movies.
True.
So we'll do more of that. Okay. On to the main course here. Something new. We mentioned it earlier. We watched a, somewhat Christian movie, a main character of Jesus. Josh, give us a little backstory on Last Days in the Desert before we offer our proposals.
Okay, so this is the Ewan McGregor film. Came out last year. It's an imagined chapter from Jesus' 40 days of fasting and praying in the desert. On his way out of the wilderness, Jesus struggles with the devil over the fate of a family in crisis. And so this came out on DVD recently.
Yeah, so I rented it through some streaming service, or whatever. It's not in it may be in some theaters still, but it's definitely
I'm sure
not easy to come by.
Gone, yeah.
All right, so Josh, your proposal on Last Days in the Desert.
All right, here's my proposal. First of all, I want to say I liked it, but I propose that Last Day in the Desert is the film Christian filmmakers need to be making.
Okay. All right. See, now this is going to be an interesting conversation because my proposal is that Last Days in the Desert is an unbiblical bore of a movie created by a guy with very serious daddy issues.
Yes. And which I can totally see that coming from you.
Is that an insult?
No.
You unsophisticated film watcher.
No. From a perspective, because I think we're coming from 2 different perspectives here. Where, I don't think this film, I wouldn't call this a biblical film.
No.
And what I'm saying, what Christian filmmakers need to make more films like this, it's not the content. It's how he made the film.
Right.
Which, here's a guy who's not a Christian. He was raised in the Catholic Church, but he doesn't really pursue a faith in God or anything like that. And he started out writing a movie that was not about Jesus. Mm-hmm. And it developed into that.
Well, my theory is he ultimately made this story about Jesus because if it was about anybody else, nobody would see this movie.
Well, true. It has to. But if you think about that, you have to take things up a notch to make it worth your time to go. Yeah. It's got to be a spectacle, right?
Yeah.
And so there's got to be something interesting here where it's like, you could read this story, on a 1-page short story, or if we want to see it on the big screen, something's got to draw us in.
Well, and it did for me. To be honest, I was really excited about watching this movie for a couple of reasons. Number one, most films about Jesus, or even biblical themes in general, tend to be huge spectacles, right? And they get really schmaltzy and whatever. But this, I saw, this is really interesting because it's about Jesus in the desert, right? During the temptation, kind of the isolated low point of his ministry.
And we've never really seen this.
Yeah, it's not really depicted well. And I also knew going into it that Ewan McGregor not only portrays Jesus, but also portrays the devil, which I thought brilliant. Because one of my favorite depictions of the temptation in the wilderness was written by Anne Rice in one of her novels about Jesus. And that's what she does, is she depicts the enemy as Jesus, but in a kind of... So I was like, okay, this is going to be good. And I also knew the guy is a really good filmmaker. So like, okay, this is going to be so fascinating to watch this. And it was so not. Like, it was so...
Because you were bored?
Well, it was just beyond boring, number one. Number two, the stories about Jesus encountering a family while he's out in the wilderness, of a father, a son, and a very sick mother. And his interactions with this family, which obviously does not occur in Scripture. It's a completely imaginary episode. The story is not about his temptation by Satan. It's not about wrestling with his identity in any significant way. It's about how does he help this family out, and it's this tension between what I assume to be a teenage son and this father and this family out in the wilderness, and it was just not. It didn't have to be about Jesus. Like, this could have been any lonely wanderer out in the desert encountering somebody who's then having side conversations with an imaginary kind of devil sitting on his shoulder.
We'll come back to my proposal in a minute, but where I disagree with you on this is they used the story of the Father and the Son in the desert as a way to mirror the relationship of Jesus and his Father.
Yeah, but they didn't really.
Well,
not enough.
Right. And the filmmaker even admits that you leave this film with more questions. And because obviously we don't know what happened in the desert. We don't know Jesus. We don't know what it's like to, we can't relate to the divine side of Jesus, but we can potentially relate to the human side of it. And so the questions are, well, did Jesus feel isolated? I mean, we know when he was on the cross, he expressed those feelings, So when he was in the desert, here's Jesus, the Son of God. Did he feel alone? Did he feel, how can we relate to someone like that? One way is through the relationships that we have, well, namely a father and son relationship, where this son wants to know his destiny. What I want to do this, and then the father who loves him is saying, no, I want you to do that. And so there's this struggle. They don't know how to communicate with each other. So the question is like, well, did Jesus experience that? And we don't really know. That's just kind of a question, and we enter into that, which is why I thought it was great that they were willing to explore that. I don't think most Christians would be willing to explore that.
Fair enough, except I think that's total crap. and here's why.
Say no more.
A couple of things. I mean, all right, the filmmaker is not a Christian. He's certainly not a biblical scholar. He definitely doesn't know anything about first century Jewish culture. Okay. Because the tension between this son wanting to go off and have his own life and a father who doesn't, that's imposing a 21st century individualistic, self-actualizing view of life upon a first century pre-modern ancient culture. It was not normal in the ancient world for a teenage son to have dreams and ambitions that would take him away from his family and community. That's not what happened. If your father was a fisherman, you were a fisherman, and there wasn't a whole lot of tension about that. Number one. Number two, there's a character, I don't want to ruin it, but there is a character who dies in the movie, and they cremate the body on a table. I'm like, no Jew in the first century cremates a body. That is not what they did, right?
This is your biggest complaint about the film?
I'm just, no, my point is there is absolutely zero attempt to make this in any way historically or culturally accurate. So for that reason, this movie for me had zero biblical value.
Maybe less credibility because of...
Well, if you're interested in knowing more about Jesus, which is... I assume somebody who goes to a movie where the main character is Jesus, they're probably interested in knowing something more about Jesus. This movie does nothing. It offers zero dimension to a first century messianic character in ancient Israel. It's just, there's nothing about it. It's not rooted in any biblical narrative. It's not rooted in a Jewish character. It's not rooted in Jewish culture. It's not rooted, none of it. It's just, they just took the name of Jesus because they knew he's a fascinating historical character and made up a story about him. And I just didn't see what the point of that was. Now, if you wanted to tell a story of there's 4 characters in this whole movie, really. If you wanted to tell an interesting story about 4 characters and family dynamics.
There's 5 characters.
Well, yeah, there's that weird, creepy woman at the beginning.
Jesus,
Satan, the 3 and 3. Right. Okay. But it didn't. I don't know. It feels like on one extreme, you have a lot of people making so-called biblical movies because there's a whole huge chunk of Christians out there who will pay money to go see them. And a lot of those movies have been incredibly bad and disappointing.
Yes.
So on the other end, you have this movie where I'm going, okay, it's artistically made, it's thoughtfully done, but it has zero, in my view, biblical value. So... are those our only options? Well,
and see, I enjoyed this film not because I walked away feeling that I had a more accurate picture of Jesus during that time. I walked away, one, as a film, I thought it was beautiful. I thought the actors were fantastic. I thought the story was compelling between the father and the son. It's not a mainstream film. It is slow. It is methodical. It's about, Jesus. There's not a lot of dialogue in the film. But what intrigued me about it was it was willing to ask questions and make you think about things about Jesus, not about the culture of, how Jews did things back then, or even necessarily the relationship between a father and son back then, but in my life today, asking myself and wondering, Jesus came from heaven, from the presence of God to be with us. What was that like for him to experience being human? And I don't know that we can really know that, but the questions can be asked, and they use that relationship with the Father and Son to reflect that, to suggest things that Jesus, felt loneliness or sadness or frustration or anger or desired, what is my destiny? They didn't really, they implied that Jesus knew something was coming significant, but they didn't really say if he knew what was coming or not. And so those are, I think, interesting questions that you leave the theater not with information about Jesus, but wondering more and more curious about a side of Jesus than you had before.
Okay, fair enough. I think you probably brought more of those questions into the movie, or you, because of your own knowledge of faith and Jesus and all that. My hunch is you probably got more out of this movie or had more interesting questions from this movie than somebody who was coming in without that background.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? So it just, a lot of that is maybe implied or brought by the audience to the movie, but it's not in the movie. It's not. If somebody didn't know anything about Christian faith and watched this movie, I'm not sure they would have any of those questions about Jesus.
Well, right, but I think the reason they picked Jesus is because most people who go to the theater would know about him.
I guess. I didn't feel like I ever have to see this movie again.
I might watch it again. In going back to my proposal, I don't, I'm not, I enjoyed the film. I don't think it's mainstream. I don't think everyone would enjoy it. But what I appreciated about it was the way it was made. I mean, this is a film. They hired an awesome cinematographer.
It was beautifully shot.
Right. So and
the acting was good.
Yeah. And so they used those elements of filmmaking to tell a story.
Yeah. Which
a lot of not good filmmakers, or let's say Christian filmmakers, don't really implement necessarily.
Yeah.
They come in with an agenda first, where he came in to tell a story, and it developed into this thing. And he probably missed it by a mile in terms of interpreting Jesus, what he looked like and how he, behaved and things like that. But it was an intriguing story that drew me in. I didn't mind that it was slow and methodical. It's a good break from, the Avengers and things like that, I think. But I wish more people would approach filmmaking in that regards, where they're trying to tell a story and then a truth is born out of it versus the other way around.
I agree with. That I can completely agree with. I think there are elements of the filmmaking here that should be applauded and emulated by people who are wanting to make films that communicate important ideas. But in and of itself, I can't, I cannot bring myself to just be enthusiastic about this film. There were so many misses for me, and a lot of it was I had such higher expectations. I feel like if somebody, forget the filmmaking itself, let's go back to the story and to this episode of Jesus' life, which is an important one, and asking important questions about his relationship to the Father and his destiny and what he's supposed to do and what he's not supposed to do and temptation, all that. A far, far better depiction of that is in Anne Rice's book, Christ the Lord, The Road to Cana. If you read that book, it wrestles beautifully with those questions. It does so in a manner which takes into account first century Jewish culture in a meaningful way. It also fabricates a season of Jesus' life that we don't know anything about, which is the season just before his public ministry. And not to ruin that novel or spoil it too much, but the core tension in that novel is Jesus is 30 years old and he's not married, obviously. And to be a 30-year-old Jewish man and not be married was scandalous in that culture. And so Jesus is wrestling with whether or not he's supposed to get married. And ultimately, it does include a scene of him in the wilderness being tempted by Satan. And it's really compellingly done. And it does ask all those questions about who am I? What is my destiny? What does that look like? Am I supposed to be married? And on and on and on. And it was profoundly interesting. So I think that's part of the reason I was so jaded by this film is it may have attempted to ask some of those questions about who am I and what's my relation to the Father, and all, but it just fell flat for me because it didn't work. It didn't go far enough, and it was boring. It was really, really boring. It was beautiful to see on the screen. Some of the actors were fantastic. The ending, I got to talk about the ending. Spoiler alert, right? Ending. I don't know why they had to show the crucifixion. I don't know what the frigging hummingbird was about.
Oh, yeah, that was odd.
And then the very last scene of the movie. Do you remember this?
Oh, yeah.
What was that?
Do we want to talk about that?
Okay, you go ahead.
So they show, well, the ending ties into a question, which I thought was profound that a non-Christian was pointing to this, which was Satan asks Jesus, will anyone 1,000 years from now care about what you do right now? Mm-hmm. So that was kind of in the middle of the movie.
Right.
And so he is taunting Jesus. Fast forward to the end, there's the crucifixion. And
there's no resurrection scene.
There's no resurrection scene, correct. So you see him on the cross, a hummingbird kind of pops in front of his face, which seemed significant yet out of place, and I didn't see how that tied into
anything. Very artsy, kind of Portlandia. Put a burn on it.
Well, now here's the thing. This movie takes place in this dangerous, desolate, isolated place away from civilization, far from anything.
Lots of mountains and cliffs. And
it was very dangerous. I mean, just like traveling, getting water, and it was why they were even out there was dangerous, right? It was questioning why they were there. And then he dies on the cross, and the place where he dies, it all of a sudden it kind of transposes from back then to present day, and two people in present day walk out in jeans and t-shirts, whatever, take a picture of the landscape and then walk away. Mm-hmm. And so to me, I think what was significant about that was, well, back when Jesus was doing this, he was alone, he was afraid, it was dangerous, and then he did this significant thing. And then fast forward to present day, and people are now coming here as a tourist site.
Oh, I didn't take that away at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, they took a picture, which made me think and so the question was, did Jesus dying have any significance on people today? And that was kind of the question I felt that they ended on.
Yeah.
And that you as the audience member now either wrestle with or ignore.
See, that's not how I interpret it. I didn't really have a great interpretation of it, but it wasn't that, because they go from the crucifixion scene to then these big wide vistas of the wilderness. Right?
Right.
And there's a lot of those in the movie. Right. A lot of these big.
It was the same opening.
Right. So this big, wide, huge vista of the wilderness, and it's lots of crevices and kind of mountains, and on one of these little cliffs from a great distance, you cannot see who these people are at all. You see two tiny little figures, one wearing blue and one wearing red, I think. So it's pretty obvious they're wearing like modern clothing. Go out onto this little edge, and one takes a picture of another, and then they kind of scurry off. You can't see who they are at all. And I'm like, I didn't know what to make of that. And so here are a couple of my interpretations. Is this another father and son? Because the movie's about Jesus and his father, and it's about this father and son that he meets out in the wilderness. And is it the filmmaker's way of saying, yeah, this whole father-son relationship just goes on and on and on and on and on. Like, here's another father and son out in the wilderness, but now they're taking pictures, but we still live with these same tensions as always. That was one thought. Another was going back to Satan's question, will anyone care or remember what you did 1,000 years from now? What's depicted there at the end is not people venerating the location of Jesus' death, or I don't even know if that was the location of Jesus' death. It just looked like the wilderness again. And so it looked to me like, no, life's gone on. No one really cares.
Right.
Like in this same vista that you're looking at, there was this incredible temptation between Satan and the creator of the universe happened here. No one cares. We're just taking a picture now. Like, it's no big, So it was, I didn't know how to interpret it, but it certainly wasn't. There's a lot of things in this movie which are not obvious, and I get that. It's supposed to be artsy. It was a Sundance movie, all of that, but... Which
once again, going back to a lot of other films, like, I I walked away with questions, not this is what they slammed in my face.
Fair enough.
And I could interpret it in my viewing just as like you said, like someone else would interpret it differently, which is great because it wasn't obvious. It was very subtle, and it was all about questions and just presenting like, what about this? And then you've got to walk away and say, wow, that was a beautiful piece of film, interesting story and acting. You know, what did you get from it? And now the conversation ensues.
So there's that old quote, I don't know exactly, about jazz, that before you can break the rules of music, you first have to know the rules, right? I feel the same way about anything when it comes to depicting the life of Jesus, whether in writing or preaching or filmmaking. If you want to be adventurous in how you depict the life of Jesus, you first have to show that you understand the life of Jesus. And this movie basically says, yeah, we don't understand Jesus at all. We're not pretending to understand. We're just going to make up some crap about it. And then, so when you get to the end, and you're right, there's all these unclear hummingbirds and people walking out on cliffs and weird stuff, and you're like, oh, it's asking us weird questions about Jesus, and we're supposed to wrestle. Fine, but you haven't shown me at all that you actually understand the meaning and life of Jesus, so that you can play with it. And that's what Anne Rice's novels, I think, actually do really well. They're grounded in enough scripture and history to go, okay, now let's play around a little bit and provoke people into thinking ideas that they wouldn't have otherwise thought. So that's what didn't grab me, is this filmmaker and the film and the depiction, all of it. It was trying to make points that it hadn't earned the right to make. That was my take on it. So, do you take this movie to be watched again, Josh?
I do. And I would encourage any avid film goers who don't mind something slow and methodical to check it out.
I am not planning to watch this movie again. And if anyone out there is interested in watching this, I would advise you to not go into it expecting to learn anything meaningful. If you want to just view it as an interesting film for filmmaking purposes, that's fine. And I would not want to put this movie in front of anybody who doesn't know much about the life of Jesus, because they may misunderstand it and be led astray. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, okay. We've done something old, something new, something borrowed. We're actually going to continue on with our borrowed piece about this movie. You found an article that is relevant to The Last Days in the Desert.
Yeah, so this is from Christianity Today. Alyssa Wilkinson. Do you know Alyssa?
I don't know her personally, but she does do a lot of reporting on the film industry and movies for CT.
Well, she interviewed Rodrigo Garcia, the filmmaker, and Ewan McGregor. And the thing that was interesting about this was it focused on, well, what was interesting to me was that it focused on a filmmaker who's not a Christian and the lead actor who's not a Christian, how they were drawn to this story. And I always find that interesting when non-believers are in a film about Jesus or tell a story about Jesus, that they're drawn to that. Because I don't understand the perspective. I'm drawn to it because of I'm a Christian and my relationship with Christ and what I believe, it to be true and so forth. And so I'm intrigued. Why would a non-Christian want to tell a story about Jesus that has, a lot of the world believing things about him that seem to be fantastical, to them, right? And so, Did you read the article?
I did.
Okay.
I skimmed it. Okay. I didn't spend a lot of time with it. I was kind of so angry after watching the movie that I didn't want to give more of my energy to it.
Well, they talk about, how, and this kind of goes back to my proposal where the article talks a lot about his approach, where he didn't set out to tell a story about Jesus. And he admits that the writer, Rodrigo, is that when he writes, he's writing as himself, because that's all he knows is himself. And so it's interesting as a writer's perspective.
Very postmodern.
Yes. That how could he imagine what it's like to be Jesus? The closest thing he could imagine would be, well, if he truly is divine, he can't imagine the divine side, but he could at least imagine the human side. And so that's the story he wanted to tell. And, Alyssa asks him, was this really about you and your dad? Because his dad is a famous artist, and so he admitted there's probably something there. And but once again, he's writing from his perspective, so he can't help it.
Well, and this gets to the fact that, and it's not just true of Rodrigo Garcia, but pretty much everyone in our culture, or in any culture that has a Christian framework, Jesus is sort of an empty vessel that people can fill with whatever they want. So we remake Jesus all the time. He's almost like a Rorschach test. When you say Jesus or Jesus Christ, people are going to project into that word or that figure all kinds of things. Some people think, oh, he's the greatest business mind that ever lived, and others a great moral leader, and others, whatever. It just goes on and on. And so in that regard, this movie is just another empty vessel. We're just going to take this Jesus vessel, and in this case, Rodrigo Garcia fills him with his own daddy issues and projects them onto the screen for us.
Right. Which, once again, I mean, this is a film. It's a piece of art. It's got a lot of, I think, great attributes to it. But it's doing what a lot of us need to be doing, is asking, well, who is Jesus? And he probably missed the mark. I mean, he was only telling a tiny snippet that he had to make up, right?
It's not even in Scripture.
Right.
But I admit that it's an imaginary tale.
Right. But I think that's what a lot of artists miss out on is having the courage to go down roads and ask questions and not try. Obviously, they're influenced by their own beliefs and their own experiences, but to try and ask questions and go down a road without an agenda, and land somewhere where, to me, I mean, the relationship. The two most interesting things to me in this film were the relationship between Jesus and Satan, and then the relationship between the Father and the Son. And most movies are interesting, entertaining, because there's a good story revolving around some relationship.
Right.
And so that's why I thought this kind of worked. I didn't walk away from here, like I said earlier, I understand Jesus better now, but it was an engaging piece of film because it focused on those relationships and then made me question, well, what did Jesus deal with, and how more profound is it to think about what Jesus did for us if he was dealing with isolation, sadness, questioning, things like that. And in the end of the article, he says, this is Rodrigo speaking, I'm happy if whoever sees it has questions. The movie is full of questions. The movie's all about my own questions. And that's a great place to start, I think, a story or a film.
All right. So if you do end up watching the movie, you should probably check out Alyssa Wilkinson's article in Christianity Today, her interview with Ewan McGregor and
Rodrigo Garcia.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot more I can say.
That's fine.
I mean, I will say it is, as far as the craft of filmmaking, and to the limited degree I understand that craft, it's well crafted.
How are we doing on time?
I don't know, but we got to wrap it up here soon.
Oh, okay. Well, I had a story. What made me think of this was, we know Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
When Matt Damon and Ben Affleck came up with that story, a big part of that story was Matt Damon gets a job with one of those firms. He's this brilliant kid with a rough background, and he gets a job to do code breaking and so forth. And in the original screenplay, he discovers that after getting this job and the work that he's doing, he thinks it's, he's not really sure what it is, but he's so smart, he figures out that he's helping break codes so that the government can launch, missiles and destroy, terrorists and so forth, but at the same time, killing innocent people. And so then it becomes this conspiracy about how he can stop that because he's so smart and so forth. Well, they take this screenplay and they give it to Rob Reiner and they ask what his opinion on it. And he says, you got to get rid of all the conspiracy stuff. You need to focus on the relationship.
Yeah.
And so they get rid of all that. And what helped make Good Will Hunting a great movie is they focused on the relationship between Matt Damon and his girlfriend and Robin Williams. And that's what was an intriguing story, is they just, where would this go in this relationship, not this grandiose conspiracy thing. And I think that's just another element of good filmmaking, where they just, they explore something we can all relate to, which is relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in the big blockbuster movies, if there isn't compelling character development and if there isn't compelling tension in relationships, they're just not worth it, right? The spectacle isn't alone enough to grab us, which I think, to get off track a little bit, something we were talking about before we recorded, is a lot of the problem with the DC comic book movies versus the Marvel movies. The Marvel movies don't do the best at character development, but there's more of it, and there's interesting tensions between characters, whereas in DC, Superman and Batman go to fight each other for no good reason, and then they make up because both their moms are named Martha, which is the stupidest thing in the world. So anyway, you're right, and I am all for movies that really develop character, develop relationships, and even small intimate movies that do that in a compelling way are wonderful. This just didn't do it for me. I think the moment you make it about a biblical character, especially Jesus, there are so many other dynamics that come into play. If this had just been a standalone movie about a wandering monk in the wilderness who stumbles upon a family in crisis and is wrestling with God over what to do, that would have been for me more compelling than the moment you make it about Jesus.
I don't know. It sounds boring to me.
Exactly. It's a boring movie, but it still would have been, I would have had less baggage with it. Okay. Something old, something new, something borrowed. It is time for our last segment, something blue, something that either blew our minds or that blew chunks that we've seen in the last week or so. What's your blue?
Okay, so
entry?
I just saw the Coen brothers film, Hail Caesar.
Hail Caesar. I have wanted to see this.
All right. Well, George Clooney, Josh Brolin, could not wait to see it. There's actually Jesus is in this film, which is one of the reasons I picked this. He's in there for like 5 seconds, and you only see him from behind. He's got not only blonde hair, but like gold blonde hair, and it's hilarious because he's portrayed in a film back in like the 1950s or whatever it is, and I hate to say it, but it blew chunks.
Oh no!
I just kept waiting for it to get good, and it had all these elements of great Coen films of just fantastic characters, goofy storylines.
So why did it blow?
It never caught traction for me. It had commentary on religion, had commentary on capitalism and socialism, on the film industry, on our purpose in life, and it followed Josh Brolin the whole time, where he was we'll call him the straight character, and he was surrounded by all these kind of funny characters, but it didn't latch on to anyone long enough for me to care.
So great ensemble, great ideas, but just doesn't execute.
Yeah, it was a big letdown.
Okay. Well,
very boring.
Jason says it's very boring.
Very boring.
So the other night,
It was boring.
the other night, our kids are all out of the house doing other stuff. My wife and I are finally sitting down. We're going to watch a movie together, which we haven't done for a while. And we're skimming through trying to figure out what we're going to get. I was making a case for Hail Caesar, which we did not end up watching. What we did end up watching was Whiskey Tango Foxtrot.
Oh, with Tina Fey?
With Tina Fey and Bilbo Baggins. What's his name? The actor.
Martin Freeman.
Martin Freeman.
There you go.
Right? And there's a couple of other people in there that we may know. Anyway, I hate to admit, I think it blew chunks. It wasn't horrible. Maybe I just threw up a little bit in my mouth, but it wasn't. I had, again, expectations. Tina Fey is hysterical.
Yeah.
I want to say Morgan Freeman. It's Martin
Freeman.
Martin Freeman. Yeah. No relation that I can tell. I think this is going to be funny, and it's set in Afghanistan during the war, and she's a correspondent, and there's going to be they're going to take a serious thing and make it funny, and I mean, it was interesting, but it was not. It was too long.
Was it a comedy?
No.
Okay. The trailers made it look like a comedy.
Exactly. The trailer, we watched the trailer, like, oh, this looks funny. It's Tina Fey, and she's joking about women driving in Afghanistan and stuff like that. But no, it was actually pretty serious and kind of dark and depressing, and it wasn't that good. Yeah. And I was disappointed. I mean, I don't know. It was okay, but it wasn't.
Did you say you watched this with your family or
with my wife?
Your wife.
Just with Amanda.
I got it.
It's not family friendly.
I didn't think so.
But it wasn't funny either. It was really depressing.
That's too bad.
It wasn't bad. It wasn't like horrible. It isn't like if I had paid money to see this, I would have demanded it back. It just wasn't as good as I had hoped it would be.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing I'm realizing, both from Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, from Hail Caesar, from Last Days in the Desert, all these movies were rated really highly on Rotten Tomatoes.
Wait, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot had high ratings?
Yeah, it had like maybe 80%.
Really?
70%? I don't remember. What's it at? You're not on the right site there.
Yeah, I mean, Last Days in the Desert got 70%.
Yeah, those are from people who don't know what they're talking about.
Well, they didn't like Suicide Squad.
That's true. I'm a little worried that
68%.
68%. I mean, I My rating would have been closer to maybe 50%.
Okay.
But
Hail Caesar got 85%.
exactly. So I'm thinking the masses might be wrong.
Yeah.
Which is all the more reason why you need our podcast. We will set you straight.
Exactly.
So, anything last thoughts, Josh?
No, I'm good.
You got it? Okay.
I told my Ben Affleck story, so I'm good.
Anything you want to put in here? Apparently not. Okay.
Actually, one thing.
There is something.
That Last Days in the Desert, one of the recommended movies beyond that is Life of Brian by Monty Python.
Well, there you go.
It says if you
Jesus
like
is in that
this,
film.
if you like this, you'll like Life of Brian.
That was a good one. I will say the comments on Patreon are very helpful and encouraging, so keep them coming.
Yeah, we need your feedback. We're thinking one or two more of these things. We'll look at the feedback, and then we may well launch this podcast out to the world. So your thoughts and feedback. If you've seen Last Days in the Desert, we'd love to hear what you thought about the movie. Give us your feedback on that. If you want to give us recommendations or suggestions for other movies you would like us to review, that'd be good as well. And I'm curious, just what would you say is the best depiction of Jesus on film that you've seen? Best movie, best miniseries, whatever. Best depiction of Jesus that you've seen that you would recommend other people actually watch. I'm curious, Josh, maybe you would be too.
Yeah, I would too. I'll save my thoughts for that for the next podcast.
Yeah, if you give us enough feedback, we may talk about that on the next episode. So until then, I'm Skye Jethani.
And I'm Josh Lindsey.
Thanks for listening. You may now kiss this podcast goodbye.
Always look on the bright side of life.